Hello, I'm Britton Clennett and welcome to China Insight, where we discuss the latest issues affecting this rapidly changing country. Well, 80 years ago, the embattled Chinese Communist Party and its Red Army embarked on a strategic retreat from the clutches of Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. The Long March began in the southeastern province of Jiangxi and ended in Shanxi about 2 years and more than 12,000 kilometres later. But what relevance does the event have in modern-day China? To help me answer that question, I'm joined by former diplomat and Long March expert, Zhang Yuanyuan. Welcome to the program.
Welcome to be.
Now, for our international audience who might not know about the Long March or might not be familiar with it, could you give us a short description of what it was? What happened?
Actually, the Long March was a collective name for many Red Army units. Mm-hmm. Overall, this Long March took place in the periods of 1934 to 1936. Very soon we're going to mark the victory of the joining forces of the three most important forces, that is the first, the second, and the fourth front armies.
Mm. And why was the event or is the event so significant today? Mm.
Well, when you look at the people or the personalities involved in the Long March, you would find that almost all the founding fathers of the People's Republic of China were somehow involved in the Long March. Take, for example, the 10 marshals of the Chinese PLA. 9 out of all 10 marshals participated in the Long March.
So yes, it did consolidate some leaders' power, including Mao Zedong. But how significant is the event in history?
Well, the Long March solved many interesting and significant problems. For example, who was actually leading the Chinese Revolution? Mm-hmm. Before, it was a distant combatant in Russia, in Soviet Union, who did that, performed that function. But during the Long March, the Red Army lost contact with the combatant, and they had to make decisions on their own. And finally, they acted on their own, and among other things, they chose their leaders.
Right.
Chairman Mao emerged as the leader of the Chinese Revolution during the Long March.
And thus they embarked on this journey that changed the course of Chinese history. Thank you for that introduction. China Insight reporter Joey Catanzaro travelled to Sichuan province to retrace part of the Long March and spoke with some people who are arguably more qualified to speak on the topic than anyone else, because they actually lived out this historic event. Let's check it out.
In her apartment in Chengdu, Sichuan, Li Hongsheng sits and combs through the memories of a long life. At first glance, the 97-year-old great-grandmother could be mistaken for an average pensioner. But Li is a woman full of steel and stories, one of the last surviving members of a group of ordinary Chinese people who accomplished something extraordinary that changed their nation forever.
我认为你看起来像20岁。
那是已经是80、90岁的人呐。
好。Li Hongsheng hasn't been able to get around properly since she broke her hip a few months back, but the 97-year-old is determined to walk again, and every step she takes now brings her one step closer to her goal. 80 years ago, on a difficult journey of a different kind, she did the same thing, putting one foot in front of the other despite great adversity. Her enemies then weren't age or injury, but bombs and bullets. Li Hongsheng is actually one of the last living links to a legend.
Because when she was just 15 years old, she joined China's Red Army on the famous Long March.
What made you decide to join the Long March, and can you tell us the story about how that happened?
说男女都可以参军，那个时候我就思想上尝试，可以参军，很好奇了。那个时候，我就出来，3天我就出来了， 我去报名，还嫌我小了。我说我要长大嘛。红军三大任务，大到帝国主义，铲除封建势力，实行土地革命。
Yan Yongming is a soldier turned sculptor creating works to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Long March. Li Hongsheng is one of his muses. The Long March was a more than 12,000 kilometre journey across China, made by Red Army forces between 1934 and 1936, as they sought to escape annihilation at the hands of the Nationalist Army. Their odyssey helped shape the nation's history. Now it's being shaped in clay.
红军的精神，他能够成功，能够为天下劳苦人大众打遍天下，他是靠的一种艰苦卓绝，一种永不放弃的精神，就是女排精神。所以说，郎平在带全中国的这个选拔出来的运动员，开始给他们第一条教导就是：你们现在可以走，我不责怪你们。但是如果你要跟着我，就是吃苦。
Many of the Long Marchers were young, much like Zhang Duwei, Yongming's protege. When Red Army forces across China marched to Shanxi province, they persevered despite bombs and bullets, hunger and harsh conditions. Their determination in the face of adversity has come to be known as the Long March spirit. It's captured the imagination of Chinese people for decades. Duwei hopes to capture it in his work.
因为我们现在不需要去爬雪山、过草地这些，所以就把这种精神放到每一件小事上面，要把它做完、做好的一个勇往直前的一种精神。很多事情，如果你没有抱着这种心态的话，会半途而废。
The Long March was the beginning of an even longer journey for China, the first step on a road that has led to rapid development and a place for China on the world stage as an economic powerhouse. Cosmopolitan, urbanised, home to a rising middle class, China and Sichuan have changed vastly in the past 8 decades.
The Long March is now a thing of the past, but that's been replaced by the March of Progress, and that progress is evident everywhere you look here in Chengdu.
But there are those who believe modern China can still learn from its past. This Chengdu local, Jia Xiaohui, is one of them. The retired nurse and amateur historian is visiting Sichuan University to give a lecture on the Long March. Both her mother and father-in-law were Red Army soldiers, and she believes the Long March spirit, a window into the past, is still timely and relevant today. While several contingents of the Red Army reached the eventual safe haven in Shanxi, Xiaohui says the most famous was the First Front Army led by Mao Zedong, which barely escaped annihilation when the nationalists surrounded their base in Jiangxi province. As she explains, of the roughly 300,000 soldiers who trekked across China, only about 10% of them survived to finish it.
我觉得红军精神就是这些，没有什么高大上的，就是那些语言，但是他们用行动践行了他们自己的初心。
This is a generation of young Chinese people who have never known the hardships endured by those who came before them. And yet the lecture resonates. Some say they seek to employ Red Army tactics to succeed professionally.
Change your policy and based on the current situation, because at that time we in a weak position, so we just do not just go against our enemy directly, and indeed we use another way, which is called bushfighting.
I'm here with a young man who's studying polymer science. He's also a young party member. Can you tell me, what did you learn from the Long March lecture today, and how do you think you can apply that in your daily and professional life?
Okay, I think the things that inspire me most is the power of belief. In the scientific research area, there are many unknown fields. With the power of belief, you believe there must be a way to get through it. I think you will finally achieve something new.
Best of luck. Thank you. Most of the students who attended Jia Xiaohui's lecture here at Sichuan University are destined to become China's scientists of tomorrow. And these bright young people, so important for China's future, say they believe they're better placed to overcome the challenges ahead by drawing on inspiration from China's past.
Monuments marking the Red Army's progress 8 decades ago can be found across Sichuan, where the 4th Red Army endured some of the harshest conditions on the march, traversing snow-capped mountains before crossing this bridge in Wenchuan.
我的初衷就是要把这段历史，把它如实的记录下来，因为现在的老同志嘛，他们的口述资料弥足珍贵了。
Shaohui has a personal connection to this place, the village where 30,000 battle-weary marchers rested before tackling the grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau. Up there, sucking bogs, cold and hunger would claim the lives of many.
In 1935, the Red Army passed through this mountain village. When they marched out of here, they left someone behind, Jia Xiaohui's wounded father-in-law. Today, she's following in his footsteps to meet with the descendants of those who put everything at risk to take him in and nurture him back to health.
Suffering from a gunshot wound to the leg, Xiaohui's father-in-law was commanded, despite his protests, to stay behind and hide in this family home when the army moved on. This is Yu Mingliang, the son of the couple who took him in.
1935年，红军长征团路过我们这个地方，这4方面军将他的父亲，送到我们这个地方来。
Xiaohui's father-in-law recuperated in secret. The consequences of discovery for him and those providing him with shelter would have been dire. Yu Mingliang, a former PLA soldier who was born just 2 years after the end of the Long March, grew up listening to stories of the wounded man who was hidden from the nationalist soldiers and sympathisers in his family's 2,000-year-old home. Beneath the trapdoor, set into floorboards on the 2nd floor, is a secret room where the wounded soldier was hidden while he regained his strength. A room that remains to this day.
最后我们就把这位老红军站到这个地方去住去了。我把这个打开给你看看啊。
The visit is an emotional experience for Xiaohui that opens doors to memories, both good and bad.
当时我的宗旨就想，我抓紧时间，因为老兵等不起嘛，老兵都是那么大的岁数，等不起了。但是我没想到我们家的这些老兵也是等不起，我的父亲也是心梗在家里面去世，这个对我震撼是很大。
In her humble Chengdu home, Xiaohui keeps a treasure trove of anecdotal accounts she has collected from more than 100 Long March veterans. When her father-in-law passed away without revealing his story, she realised something precious had been lost forever, and she became determined to track down as many Long March veterans as she could to capture their first-hand accounts of the triumphs and tribulations they experienced on the march that made modern China. She began with her mother-in-law, who, like so many of those she interviewed, has now passed from this world.
You've met so many of these Long March veterans. Is there anything in particular about them that they seem to have in common?
共同的特点，我觉得他们思想很朴实，就是他们讲，我听的最多就是说。 他们知足了，因为他们的战友牺牲了嘛，他们活到现在，他们知足了。这个17年大概拖了有将近200个红军手印，现在大多数老红军已经过世了。
Much as the Long Marches made their impression on modern Chinese history, Xiaohui has collected hundreds of their handprints, impressed in ink upon paper.
这是我婆婆侯丽珍的手印。1933年，她参加红军，她两次过草地，3次过雪山，这是她的手印。
Just a handful of those she's interviewed are still alive.
This is Peng Chang.
Yeah， 这是1935年参加红军，很强。
This is Peng Chang. At 96 years old, he's one of the few Xiaohui has interviewed who is still alive. A Red Army veteran, he still shies away from talking about the high price paid for victory.
我输了。
你这个完了吧？
You lost?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And at 96 years old, he's still winning battles. What sort of things did you experience whilst you were on the march?
开始呢，我是当红小狗的烧开水呀、洗脚水呀、洗衣服啊。在抗日战争开始的时候呢，给邓小平当过几个月的勤务兵。
If Chiang's story is that of modern China's foundation, that of his children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren reflects the nation's development and future.
爸，你看我。哎，来看的报纸，哎，对。因为他自己的知识不高，文化不高，跟他建国以后，参加工作有很多的困难，造成很多的困难，所以我父亲对我们几个兄妹的学习，是特别重视，也特别关注。
Like a touchstone for China's development, amongst Chiang's progeny is a teacher, a government official and a factory worker. And much like she did 80 years ago, Li Hongsheng is taking things one step at a time. And despite her advanced years and recent fall, she says one thing is certain.
Both she and the China she helped make are still marching forwards.
Now, you were involved in a seminal Long March text called The Long March by Harrison Salisbury, and in that process you met some of the leaders of the Long March, is that right?
Yes.
What were your impressions? What was that like?
Well, first impression is that, oh my goodness, so many national leaders who are leaders of China nowadays were actually Long Marchers. It gives me an idea, the Long March played a very important role in what has, made China to come so far. We must have met more than 100 of this party and the military veterans. On top of that, we have also met so many ordinary soldiers. Some people did not make the whole trip. They got injured. They were left behind, and they could not catch up, so they just stay on, hide themselves, hide their true identity.
As stories get passed on from generation to generation, they can, some would say, get exaggerated. This happens all the time. I just wonder, in the process of writing the book, whether you kind of there was some kind of separating fact from fiction.
Well, Harrison Salisbury has been very serious scholar. He wanted the book to be a scholarship, not just of some fiction or popular science thing. He has done a great deal of research for 12 years before the Long March project actually was allowed to go ahead in 1984. He raised that subject with Premier Zhou Enlai as early as 1972.
What did he say?
Well, he said, well, I think I want to do a project on the Long March. And Premier Zhou Enlai looked at him, smiled. Harrison did not understand why he did that. Later on, as he knew more about China, about Chinese history, and especially the Chinese Cultural Revolution that was still going on at the time, he said that I was too ignorant, too naive to propose that subject matter in 1972.
Educated Chinese know the story of the Long March. Do they know these individual stories that you're telling me now?
Yes, thanks to books like Harrison's Untold Stories, and also books written by many very smart Chinese writers. I think educated adults in China are well known, have become well known after stories of the Long March. But there's still, a difference of knowing the Long March superficially and knowing the Long March in a more fundamental way. Nowadays, you see some young people dressing like a Red Army soldier in this gray uniform with cheery faces, with going up mountains and waving red flags. Yes, that means something. But to understand what the real Red Army went through and why they go that way, why they went through all these difficulties of this journey, requires a lot of study, requires a lot of pondering, a lot of thinking. I think people talk about the Long March spirit. I think the Long March spirit is part and parcel of China's national spirit.
Well, in Australia, we have, Gallipoli and these ideas of mateship that have kind of carried on.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm getting at is these myths, these legends that kind of make up our identity as a nation. Is it fair to say that Long March plays a huge role in the foundation of Chinese identity today?
I think so. I think every nation will have some legend of their own, or in the making of their national spirit. I think the Long March certainly is one of those events or one of those developments that help shape what we have known as the China's national spirit. Get the foreign enemies out, get the society straight, get the people liberated. That is the mission of the Chinese Red Army. And the Long March has become a great epitome to that conviction. So if you say, what do the Chinese people believe in nowadays? I think they all believe in the national Chinese dream or Chinese national revitalization or renewal of the Chinese nation.
China has changed so much, in the last few decades. It's, seen rapid growth. How is this still relevant?
The Long March spirit?
Yeah.
I think, yes, to some people, Long March may be too distant in the past. But if you talk about the legacy, if you talk about the legend, the Long March certainly stands as a very good choice of a national legend, a national legacy. This is a country, China is a country that values its past. We have a very developed value system of our own. You're in China many years. You know that we are very particular about following traditions. And we certainly want to see that the Long March spirit be part of that tradition. And the more Chinese were identified with the tradition. I think that in a way, the entire work or entire job of the Chinese party, country, and the nation as a whole is the Long March. Is the Long March towards our objectives, one after another. So we need to carry forward the spirit of the Long March, learn from the fine qualities.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to China Insight. My guest, Long March expert Zhang Yuanyuan, and I have been discussing the significance of the Long March in modern China. How does the historic event resonate with Chinese people today? That's what we sought to find out. Let's take a look.
空军精神不应该淡化，应该缅怀，应该牢牢地记住。
长征的故事是我听我爷爷奶奶讲的，是那个时候，过长征的时候是经过我们这个寨子的，桃坪枪寨的。
我觉得在当代，肯定不是翻雪山过草地了，然后就是就有当下的一些精神，比如说认认真真的干好自己的工作。
但我觉得我们这一代的话，是对于这个长征精神是比较 匮乏的这种，坚持不懈的那种精神是比较匮乏的。我觉得，要是我们这一代有这种精神的话，就可以更丰富我们的精神世界。
Madam, we're just wondering, have you ever heard of the Long March?
Of course I did. Everybody knows in France at least. Yes, it was Mao's march.
And the other question I'd ask, do you think many young people in France these days would know about the Long March?
Of course they do. I'm sure they do, because they learn in history program, you learn the Long March.
Do people care about the Long March?
In China? I think so. I think so.
How about abroad?
Well, abroad the people would interpret the Long March in different ways. First, they would regard it as a process where Mao successfully escaped the doom from the hands of the Chiang Kai-shek forces, and also is the period in which Mao consolidated the hold on the power within the party and the emerging Chinese Republic. But Salisbury was different. Salisbury believed that the Long March was a spirit that would move this country of 1 billion people to a direction that no one could divine. He wrote that in the foreword of that book, of his book. He believed that this century will be a Chinese century. The Chinese will get the destiny in their own hands and will see a rising China in the new century. Of course, he wrote the book in 1980s, but he already predicted that the forthcoming century will be the century of China.
How do you get people caring more about the Long March? How do you get people to remember it actively?
Well, I think that we have to tell them what actually is the Long March, or what may not be what the Long March is all about. Sometimes we see a kind of a simplification of the Long March. I mentioned that some people dress up like a Red Army man and march for a few miles. And wow, we're learning from the Red Army. That's too superficial. I think we should learn about Red Army men's deep conviction to their cause. Recently, President Xi Jinping called on the whole party membership to stay true to the pledge, to the cause, to the commitment. And that is more important than just wearing a Red Army uniform or walk a few miles or trying to walk on the Luding Bridge or grassland or snow mountains. That's not, and personally, I see the true meaning of the Long March.
Thank you very much for your incredible insight, Zhang Yunyuan, and for coming on the program.
You're welcome.
If you have any comments or questions, you can find us on Facebook, Weibo, and WeChat. And we'll see you next time for more stories and discussion on China out of China.